Hi, I'm Jackie Albarella, and I'm here at Ken Brown's Field of Dreams Christmas tree farm. Come on with me and we'll see if we can find the perfect tree. Okay, Ken, so as we're out in the forest looking for the perfect Christmas tree to take home and keep in the house as long as we possibly can, what are some of the important things to look for so that you know you're getting a good tree?
Well, the really important thing is you have to get down on your hands and knees and look, or at least pull away the branches, because you want to make sure that trunk down there is nice and straight.
Oh
Okay?
yeah.
Because when it goes in the stand, if it's not straight, you'll never get a real tree again.
Or it falls over into the curtains or...
After that, there's so many different types and they have so many different characteristics. I think people really ought to concentrate on what they like the looks of the best. People like different looks in different trees, and that really suits the bill.
So it's really more about look than it is that one tree is better than another.
There's no perfect tree. You know, Fraser fir is probably the Cadillac of trees, holds its needles the best, and it probably looks the best, has the stiffest branches of the firs, but it's more expensive. It's harder for a grower to grow it. So there are other things that, you know, don't make it the perfect tree, but makes it pretty darn good.
Yeah, I like a Fraser fir too.
Yeah.
Now this, in fact, is
a Fraser
fir.
Yeah, nice and soft needles. The branches are fairly stiff for hanging ornaments, not nearly as stiff as blue spruce or white spruce. And a lot of people like those because of the stiff branches. I think they've inherited grandma's glass ornaments, and so they like things that don't flop when you put on a branch. So spruces probably fit better for that. But it'll hold its needles forever.
Right. So if you want to keep it up all the way to Valentine's Day, this may be the tree.
Make sure you keep it in water.
Right. Now, the other thing, what about keeping the tree after you cut a tree? You take it home and maybe you're going to leave it sitting in your garage for a few weeks or, you know, even, you know, longer. What do you do then?
Okay, first of all, I would keep it someplace where it's going to get snow and rain and cold on it until you're ready to go. Okay, so leave it outside, leave it in the shade, keep it wet.
Okay.
When you're ready to bring it in the garage someplace, dry it off. Before you put it up, make a fresh cut on the bottom, ½ inch off the bottom, get it in the stand right away, and get it into water right away. We don't recommend the mixes and the other stuff added. Most research indicates that water is plenty good enough, and that's really the important thing. And don't let it dry out after you've got it in the water. Don't let it dry for a day and then try and rewater it again, because that's not going to work.
Right, because in fact, if it dries totally out, that bottom is going to seal, isn't it? And then you would actually have to take another cut off the bottom?
I think it's a lot like cut flowers. You know, don't they mostly cut those underneath water, running water, so that you don't get air bubbles in those pockets? Once you get, I don't think it seals, it's just that you develop air bubbles in the bottom, so the vessels can't take the water up anymore. It's sort of like repriming a pump. So that's why it shouldn't dry out on the bottom. You got to keep it in water.
Yep. Now, how about some tips? It seems, I don't know, these trees always look a lot smaller out here. And then I say, well, this is going to fit in my living room. And I cut it down and I bring it in, and it hardly fits in the front door. Is there any kind of trick to knowing the size?
Well, we have people come here who actually bring, you know, rulers and yardsticks and long pieces of wood, or just you know, regular rules for carpentry rules, so that they can actually measure how big it is. But you're right, when there's no ceiling, everything looks a whole lot smaller.
Yep.
So compare it to the size of your spouse, you know, them standing next to it,
good.
looking at them standing in the living room, and hopefully you'll get it about right. I've got some real horror stories about people that have done things the wrong way.
Let's talk about some of the other varieties that people might want to try in their Christmas living room this year.
Well, the pines have been, you know, the traditional tree for years. Scotch pine, and to a lesser extent, Austrian pine. White pine in other regions of the country is much more popular than it is here. Michigan and Pennsylvania and farther south, white pine is very popular. They hold their needles forever. They hold really well. They have some dead needles sometimes on the inside, so people confuse them with dropping needles.
Right.
But it's usually needles that have fallen off in the fall that get stuck on the inside of the tree. They tend to be cheaper. Pines are probably the cheapest tree you can get. Spruces, you know, is the other group. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the stiffness of the branches and the ability to hang heavy ornaments has become a real popular feature with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So they forego a little bit of the needle holding that you lose in spruce. Just because they hold branches so well.
Right. Now, what if you wanted to have a live tree, keep a live tree, rather than, you know, cutting one off? What if you wanted to plant it out in the yard after Christmas? What's a good tree to do?
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what kind of tree. The most important thing is, if you're going to do a live tree, is you have to have a couple football players for sons.
Right.
Because it's heavy.
Right.
Okay, so first of all, you have to pick something smaller in stature. 3, 4, maybe tops 5 foot, because that ball is wet and that soil's heavy, and getting it in the house becomes a challenge. Other than that, if you've got the horsepower to get in and out, I don't think it matters. 5 days in the house, though, is all.
Max.
So put it up for Christmas time, take it down right after, get it back outside where it can get, so it doesn't break dormancy and doesn't start to grow. And that really saves on losing them. You'll get them to live most of the time.
And the other thing is dig the hole long before the ground freezes.
Oh, absolutely. I'd dig the hole in November if I could. And then take the soil out of the hole and put it in a bucket, put that someplace where that won't freeze.
Right.
So that when it comes time to move it back out, you can just set it in. You've got the soil that isn't frozen just in case we've got a cold spell around Christmas. And you can put the soil around it and you're done.
Right.
And I would plant it. I would plant it then rather than trying to store that tree somewhere above ground. Get it into the ground right after Christmas.
Okay. Ken, let's talk about this tree here. What a beauty.
Well, this is Austrian pine.
Austrian pine.
Yeah,
Okay.
fairly long needles. Makes it a little difficult to decorate because there isn't a whole lot of space between branches. But it stays green forever. As long as you keep it in water, it'll last a long time. Makes an excellent wreath material, by the way, because it does last for a really long time. Fairly stiff branches for a pine, too. It holds ornaments okay if they're a little heavy. Actually, Austrian pine's the tree I grew up with as a kid, so we probably plant too many on here on the farm, but I just plant them because it's the old traditional Christmas tree for us.
And how long have these trees been growing here? Like, how old is this tree, for example?
That tree has probably been in the ground, I would say, 6 or 7 years. You know, we start with them, they're no bigger than 10 inches high, and it takes them a while to get going. Anything takes a couple years to get some roots down. Once they get up to 2 feet, 3 feet, then they really start to grow pretty well.
Take
after
off.
that. Yeah.
And there's constantly trimming them during the summer months? or-
We spray for weeds in the spring. We mow once. Our fields are a little weedy this time of year because we only mow once, but we spend most of our summers pruning because we think the quality of the tree is more important than what the farm looks like. We want
Right.
to make sure that the trees look good.
Right. And here at the farm, people come out here and they walk through and they pick the tree that they want, and then you cut it down and away they go with it, right?
Yep, they come back, cut it themselves, drop it down, get it out to a roadway, and we've got some kids driving around on wheelers, and they pick them up and take them out for people.
Now this is
Blue spruce.
blue spruce, and
Yep.
you can tell by the blue, that beautiful blue color. These needles are a little harder on your hands,
Yeah,
I find.
it's very sharp, especially if you start reaching into the tree to hang on decorations. It is a bit of a kid-proof tree, though. Another reason people will buy blue spruce is because they take the young child up to it and they grab it once. They don't go
grab
near
it.
the tree again.
So
But it is nice and stiffly branched, so it does hold ornaments.
yeah,
really
and the
well.
heavier ornaments.
Yeah. There's a new generation, we think, of Christmas trees that are going to be on the market before too long. This is one of them. It's called Myers spruce. It's native to China. Notice the upward branch angles. That'll
Yeah.
help it hold ornaments really well. It's got stiff branches on it for holding ornaments, and we found that it grows really, really well on our heavy clay, somewhat wet soils. So we think it's a nice tree for us. We don't just shear.
Yeah.
In other words, this is cut out entirely. This could have been up here. This is cut out entirely where the cut's made. And this is cut out so that there is room in here to hang ornaments.
Right.
Too often, I think anyway, Christmas tree growers just shear them so you've got this solid wall of tree up and down both sides,
Yeah.
and it looks fine. It's nice and tight, but it doesn't let ornaments hang the way a tree does. It's sort of got some space to it where you can actually get in there and hang some ornaments.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Being able to actually put some ornaments in the spaces, and also it just, by trimming it that way, it looks so full everywhere. You don't see any. There's no spot where any of the bare spots show. That's beautiful.
Right. This is a balsam fir, by the way. Still a very popular tree, very fragrant. Probably not as
Yes.
fragrant as Fraser, but a real nice Christmas tree.
This is a concolor fir.
Right.
Nice soft needles.
Very nice soft needles, longer needles, so
Yeah.
it has a little bit different look. This tree's a little bit difficult to prune, so it's got spaces on it. Most concolor fir tend to be sheared. They tend to be fairly tight, which gives it a little bit different look to it. But it is different, and I think that's one of the reasons that it's become more popular in probably the last 10 years.
Yeah, it has a real different color. Again, almost the color of the blue spruce.
And very fragrant.
When you pick out a tree, even if it's not cut, if it's already cut, do you need to worry about where that tree was grown? Will that affect how it does in the house?
Only from the standpoint if they were grown in some place where they have never been subjected to really cold weather, frosted that winter. A lot of times trees from the West Coast get shipped east.
Right.
They haven't had cold weather. They really aren't dormant. So when they get here, they tend to have problems some years with needle drop, especially if it's very cold here.
Here it is.
Yep, this is a grand fir.
A
It's
grand fir, what a beauty.
Grand. It's native to the West Coast. It's been planted in the East for a long time, but it just really hasn't been terribly popular. Sometimes they'll dry out a little bit early in a stand. They never drop, but they'll dry. But it's extremely fragrant. Just take a whiff of some of those needles in that stem there. It's probably the most fragrant
wow.
of the Christmas trees.
Yep, this is great. This is probably the traditional Christmas tree that would be on Christmas cards and old antique things, right? The Scotch pine.
Scotch pine, yeah. It was certainly popular back in the 50s, into the 60s. I think the firs have taken over since then. But as an economical alternative, because they generally are cheaper and they tend to be nice and full and the needles will hold on them forever. Scotch pine is still a viable tree. We talked about straight stems.
Yep.
Scotch pine is one of the notorious ones for having a stem that sort of goes like this before you get it in the stand. So if you're into a Scotch pine, just make sure that stem is nice and straight.
Yeah. You know, Ken, tell me, how is it that you became a Christmas tree farmer?
It just seemed like a fun thing to do. You know, when I was late 20s, I bought some land and we started planting trees, and it just sort of worked out. You know, it wasn't really a set plan, but it was sort of in the back of my mind all the time.
How many Christmas trees do you have on your farm, roughly?
We probably have 25,000, which is really not all that big. There's a lot of Christmas tree farms much bigger than us, but I can tell you it's a handful for us to be pruning and doing everything else in the summer.
I bet, I bet. What's the most fun part about growing Christmas trees?
Selling them. You know, we go through different seasons. We have a planting season and the weed killer season and the mowing season and the pruning season. They're all fun for probably the first week or 2 weeks. After they last longer than that, all of the seasons get old.
Like any garden.
Yeah, but it's because there's so many different things to do at different times of the year, you're not doing the same thing every day, and it sort of breaks things up, makes it fun.
If somebody wants to plant some Christmas trees in their landscape, what suggestion do you have? Which one might be best to use as a landscape tree?
Well, what every gardener needs to figure out is how good or poor the drainage is on their soils, because that really dictates what you can grow. That's why we can't grow Fraser here everywhere on the farm, because it requires really good soils. Foolproof evergreens are probably going to be Norway spruce and blue spruce, because they'll grow on almost all different types of soil. It's almost hard to kill them sometimes. Once you get into the firs, your soils become much more critical. They've got to be well drained, you've got to have lots of topsoil. They're a tougher tree to grow, but they're prettier. So if you've got the soils, concolor fir is a great tree, I think. Grand fir, I think, should be planted much more in the landscape. Look for some of those more exotic ones, because they're really prettier if you've got the soils for them.
Great.